Okay, thanks everybody for sticking around for one final panel. We're going to do our best to keep you engaged for the next 45 minutes or so. My name is Benjamin Shinewald, and I'm the President and CEO of BOMA Canada, the Building Owners and Managers Association of Canada. We have 11 chapters across the country, including BOMA Toronto, right here in the GTA. Maybe I'll go to my left, starting with Dan, and ask each of my panelists to introduce themselves.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Dan Marinovic, and I'm the Chief Development Officer for a company called Dream Unlimited. Dream is a significant player in the Canadian real estate space, having been in the business for the last 25 years. We've got about $9 billion of assets under management. It was significantly larger than that up until recently when we sold about our global REIT portfolio to Blackstone for about $6.2 billion. In downtown Toronto, you know us for our office portfolio. We manage about $2 billion in assets in office. We have about an industrial portfolio of about 22 million square feet across Canada, and have just recently also ventured into Europe. On the development side, in the GTA, you'd know us for things such as the Distillery District, the Pan Am Athletes Village Canary District. You would know us for the big development that we're doing in Port Credit called Brightwater, which is reclamation of about 72 acres out there. In Ottawa, we're doing about 4 million square feet of development in a regeneration of Ottawa's waterfront. So we're fairly active in basically all asset classes in management, investment, and development in real estate in Canada.
Thanks, Ben.
My name is Ben Wong. I'm COO and General Counsel of Levante Developments. We're a low-rise home builder getting to the mid-rise space recently. We started 2011, so we are literally a new home builder and developer. I started with the company in 2012 as in-house counsel and eventually expanded my role as COO. Hello. Thanks. I now oversee the development side, marketing side, and obviously I do all the in-house legal work as well, and I'm happy to be here.
Michael?
My name is Michael Euster. I'm the Senior Vice President at Liberty Development. Liberty Development is a privately owned, full-service development company, mixed-use developer. We do land acquisition, development, construction management, and property management. And our forte really is to do true mixed-use development, which entails the residential side, potentially office and/or hotel, plus retail. Some of our larger projects are a little bit north of the city in Markham, Thornhill. We have World on Yonge, which is about 1.6 million square feet. We've done Central Square, which is a little bit over 1 million square feet, which is the old Al Palladini site at Highway 7 and Weston Road. And currently we're working on the Promenade Mall redevelopment.
Casey?
I'm Casey Gallagher. I'm with CBRE. I've been with CBRE for about 16 years. CBRE is the largest commercial real estate advisor in the world, and my role within that firm is on our national investment team. Our team covers coast-to-coast investment property sales. We run a balanced book of business of office, industrial, retail, development land, hotel, multifamily. I specifically co-run the retail book of business for our team in Toronto. I also run the development book of business for downtown Toronto.
Cool, thanks. So we're going to begin with an open question for the panel, and it's a question that frankly continues the discussion directly from the last panel, which is to say, what do you think the biggest hurdle is in moving your business to the next level? And we heard one answer in the past. Curious to see if there's other answers from you guys. And then I'll add the second question already to focus a bit more. What advice would you give to a developer just starting out? Who wants to go first? Who's brave?
I'm happy to kick off. I mean, I think it's going to be a repetitive theme, and I apologize I showed up a little bit late, but I'm sure you've heard a lot about, the access to talent and those with industry experience. When I saw this question, I was preparing for it. I thought about my own entry into this marketplace, and I'm in my early 40s. And in the early 2000s, when I got my job at CBRE, there were jobs kind of aplenty. It was every opportunity was there for me because there was such a backlog of no jobs being given out after the 1990s recession. Now, when I look at our hiring practices and the amount of talent that comes into our shop, there aren't that many opportunities for people, so we have the pick of the crop, and we have really good access to talent. Our shop is much, much bigger than where it was 15 years ago, so we do have to be really, really particular about who we take on. Adding on to that, I think for developers in particular in Toronto, because it's just so competitive, you're kind of forced to scale up, but be very geographically conscious, or sort of like pick your path kind of conscious about what you want to do and how you want to focus your development business, because you can get, if you're broad spectrum, you can kind of get lost in all the intel that you need to be really effective on it. And the last thing I would say is that because of the size of the transactions, in particular the ones that we work on or what the panelists work on, a lot of partnership arrangements are involved because they're just so massive. And managing your partners, and you'll probably hear me talk about this a little bit more further on, is critical.
Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree with what Casey was saying. I think the other thing to think about is when you're just starting out, you may not fully appreciate the timelines that are involved in developing, number one. Number two, the intensive capital that is required to develop. And so to really appreciate those types of potential pitfalls is important to do right from the beginning. I joke all the time that I get paid once every 10 years, basically. And that's just the average timeline to get a high-rise built these days. As we talked about in the previous panels, construction costs are going up. Casey knows as well as anybody, land prices have gone up exponentially over the last few years. Whereas you could, they were talking about sales of condos downtown at $1,400, $1,500, $1,600. I know there's Yorkville's at $1,700, $1,800 a foot. Just 5 years ago it was probably $900 to $1,000. So there's just a lot of hyper growth in all aspects of development, on the cost side, some also on the revenue side, but also on the timelines. So it's important to really appreciate those types of potential pitfalls when you're getting into something like this.
Ben, anything to add?
Well, it's hard to add to all that, but the other thing that I can think about in particular when I was starting out in this was that timelines for sure, but add a complication of that is managing your cash flow. And I think what I'm getting at is being realistic with your expectations. If you're getting into this, the old days of, and I can't say old days because this is what I heard before, but getting in and out in 2 or 3 years. I mean, if you're getting into the game thinking that's going to be the case, then you shouldn't get into it, because number one, your financing terms when you go to your bank, that's going to be a game changer when you find out in 3 or 4 years that you can't start there. So you're already starting off with the wrong foot if you're not realistic with those expectations. I mean, Michael was just saying it takes about 10, 15 years to get a development finished, and he's not joking. He's talking from acquisition through to getting your permits, occupying, and then getting all your securities back from the city. So that would be obviously expanding on that a little bit. The other is this culture of NIMBYism in the politics. I think that people underestimate that hugely and the impact it can have on your day-to-day operations as a developer. So one of the sites that we have in Markham right now, it's a small site, it's only 7 units, there are 7 estate lots. But I can tell you that unfortunately we've had our backs up against the wall because local Ratepayers Association has been against this project from the outset. No matter what we do, no matter how much we try to cooperate with them, and unfortunately they have the local councillors' ear. So that has set us back in many ways that were unforeseen. They get involved, the local councillor would get involved in the permits. He's looking at the language that we have in our permits. So don't underestimate that. I still preach an approach of collaboration. You want to work with these people because you're building in their neighborhoods, and you have to understand and acknowledge that you are impacting their day-to-day lives, and that's a reality. But having said that, you're going to encounter a site or multiple sites where this is one of those intangible things as being a developer. Dealing with the politics of development is what I think is adding a lot of time to the approval process. So try to keep that in mind.
Great. Dan?
So I'm a U of T alum. I've written a lot of exams in this very room, and I've probably had less anxiety than I do now about just development in general. But I cover the Canadian landscape, and we kind of look at things from a bit of a macro lens. So I'll try to paint a little bit of a picture. I think the first panel I thought, which was on real estate lending, and the lenders that were there in particular, I think they were very polite in terms of that they've seen some stuff. Like I think they're very kind of politely addressing the crowd. Over the last little bit, we've seen examples. So I think it was yesterday that Oxford announced that they're going to be redeveloping Square One for about 18 million square feet of development. We saw Cadillac Fairview buy East Harbor for about 10 million, which is going to be about 10 million square feet of development. First Capital is going to be redeveloping the Mr. Christie site, which is about 7 million square feet. We're seeing, we talked a little bit about population growth. The population growth, I think, is going to be, right now the population of Toronto is going to go from 7 to 10 million by 2046, I think in the next 25 years or so. And that's kind of like the mid-range sort of guesstimate for Toronto. That's not including the greater kind of Toronto, which kind of takes you from Niagara to Peterborough, however you want to kind of calculate it. The province, the federal government, everyone is trying to figure out how to facilitate the amount of growth that's going on. So all things to be said that there's a tremendous amount of downward pressure that's actually happening. So if you're out and you're starting out, I think you have to keep in mind that the people that are developing are in Toronto specifically are very, very good. There's a lot of tremendous talent that's out there, some of which are on the panel. And they have a very good grasp and an understanding of the approval process, the entitlement process, the construction process. They're sitting with the trades. They're knowing exactly what everything costs in the whole bit. So I think they have a very measured and quantified approach to risk. So I think that, not to discourage, but I would say that there's a niche that I think that anyone that's starting out that really truly needs to find and be realistic about. And I can't remember, there was one of the other panelists that was saying about whether or not you're left with something at the end of the day. So I would say, think about what the actual process, if you're buying a raw piece of land, if you're taking it through entitlements, you've already created a lot of value that's there. Maybe that's an opportunity for you to actually sell, to get out. Your IRR is going to be a lot higher, your return is going to be a lot higher, rather than actually taking it through the construction process and then exposing yourself to risk accordingly. So I think being very realistic in that regard is very important.
Just to add to everything, this is an extremely capital-intensive process, and I think that I want to stress that because I've been doing this for about 10 years, and that a lot of people have asked me over the years, what's the most important thing? And I mean, for good or for bad, deep pockets. So whether that's through lending institutions or finding the right partners, surrounding yourself with the right people, but keeping that in mind first and foremost. So it's already capital intensive. You got to keep your land costs low. I think Michael had mentioned that earlier, Michael Gallagher. But the significance of that shouldn't escape you. Your input land cost is probably can make or break a project, especially if you're willing to take a risk and you're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to buy this land a little bit high, and you're going to hope that the market catches up with you. I think those days are gone. I think from 2006 to 2017, a lot of people were doing that. I don't believe those days are back, or I don't know, but I think perhaps, speculating on the market at this point is probably not the best.
I think you got to be a believer in the city. I think you got to be a believer in the city. There's a question coming, I think, about this, and my thought was like, you do have to underwrite a little bit more aggressively than the next guy because the competition is just so fierce right now in terms of acquiring sites. I mean, you don't want to be irresponsible about it, but we've had groups, very big name developers that have bought very, very major sites on very, very large streams. And we see that, and that's part of it. The other part of it, because when you're selling land, it's about pricing and certainty. The other part of it is, just how much underwriting you've done and how much due diligence you've done up front to be confident that you're actually going to execute on that. But the city's going to grow, pricing is going to continue to increase at the detriment of affordability. Zoning is going to have to respond to that, and those are things that you have to firmly believe in.
And I would even go further and say, be creative. I mean, it's hard to find land that makes sense these days. So you got to be able to figure out a way to make it make sense. I could give you an example. We bought a piece out in Mississauga, which is on the future LRT that's going up Highway 10 or here, Ontario. And the planning report that was in the data room at the time suggested that the density that you could get on that site, the GFA you could get on that site, so that's gross floor area, was about 900,000 square feet. It's a 10-acre site. We've assembled more to make it 12 acres, but I know from experience that we built on a 10-acre site at World on Young 1.6 million square feet, and that was approved 5 or 6, actually even more, 8 or 9 years earlier. So I thought, okay, 900,000 seems low to me, Well, we just had a meeting with the city yesterday, actually, with the councillor, and they're about to send to write a recommendation report for 2.1 million square feet. What does that mean? I just cut my land price in half on a per square foot basis. So, I mean, if you could be creative, if you could see some value, doesn't mean be crazy, be realistic about it. I mean, you know, don't go in there and say it's 5 million square feet, but if you could be creative and see some value, carry it through, believe in yourself, but be creative with it.
So, Michael, why don't we stick with you? You mentioned in your intro of yourself that your specialization, your company specialization, is mixed use. So, do you see that trend continuing at the same pace, faster, slower, for Toronto and beyond Toronto?
Yeah, no, we truly believe in mixed use. We think that from a lot of perspectives, it's important. First of all, transportation infrastructure in the city is not where it should be, as you know. So commute times and the like are really driving down productivity. The ability to be able to walk out of your home and to your work, whether it's in downtown or where we build and on larger mixed-use sites, makes sense. It's environmentally sustainable. It's more productive. It doesn't mean everybody that we sell our condo to is going to work next door. That doesn't work like that, obviously. But more and more, we are seeing that type of use, and I think with the way land prices are, again, you have to be creative and you have to be more efficient in the way you're using them. And mixed use is really, to me, the right way to do it.
Just this morning, I was in a meeting, and we had people come in from our sister organization in the States, BOMA International, and they talked about how there is talk in the States, and presumably maybe here in Canada sooner or later, of actually having mixed-use properties with light industrial at the ground floor. The demand for light industrial is so strong. It's the Amazon effect. It's literally getting the packages to your front door that they're now discussing. Has anybody heard about that, out of curiosity, on the panel? Mixed use with light industrial on the floor?
Well, I mean, right now, there's examples of multi-story industrial that's being developed right now. Oxford's doing a 2-story one out in Vancouver, and now they're going one in the States. That's already exists. I mean, as land supply becomes less and less, the only way to go is up, and you're only going to see additional, inflation in industrial rents in order to offset the construction cost accordingly. I mean, it is the demand, I would say, just across all asset classes is tremendous at the moment.
Yeah, we'll keep the focus on the GTA, but it is land is so expensive in Vancouver that it's cheaper to send packages and containers to Calgary and then send it back to Vancouver than it is to stop in Vancouver. Okay, you mentioned, sustainability and the sustainability of mixed use. Pardon me for 1 second here. Let's pick these up. Close to my heart, little plug for my organization. Our flagship program, BOMA Best, is by far the biggest sustainability certification for existing real estate in Canada, about 3,000 buildings. Jamie in the previous panel touched on wellness, which we're seeing come up as well. So open question for the panel. What is your prediction for trends in 2020 and beyond in that area? Do you see yourselves, do you see your clients, do you see other stakeholders pressuring you either in a positive way or a negative way to go green and to be more sophisticated in your sustainability approach? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to go first. I mean, so just as a plug, 100% of all of our buildings over 100,000 square feet are all BOMA Best. So we tip our hats over to
plug away.
Yeah. So, my colleague over at Liberty was, talking about being creative. I would say that, as part of being creative, you got to do good. Doing good, means that you have to be sustainable. You have to have a strong ESG program. Sustainability is obviously a very significant component of that. And it's not a buzzword. I mean, it is something that's very real. We're building. Somebody mentioned, earlier about building buildings for people that are in high school right now. People are demanding it, and whether it's tenants or residents, it is absolutely true to the core of what you're doing. It should be stitched into everything that you're doing. For us right now, we've got a major reclamation project in Ottawa. It's going to be 4 million square feet on 40 acres, and it's in both provinces in Ontario and Quebec. And we have a major district heating thermal system, which is going to be harnessing excess steam waste basically from a paper mill downstream and putting it into to our buildings, into our residents and the whole bit. Like, I think in order to rationalize, to justify, to be able to sit down and negotiate what your densities are going to be in the whole bit, I think you have to figure out what that angle is going to be for you specific to your project.
Yeah, no, I mean, I fully agree. I think that it's, there's a responsibility to do good and to help your community, and obviously being environmentally sustainable is a big part of that. I think part of the nature of mixed-use development is helping with sustainability. I could give you many examples. I mean, we, on most of our mixed-use communities, we have our own stormwater management cisterns, which we then recycle the gray water for our green roofs. If we have an office or retail component, that gray water will also be recycled to the urinals and toilets and things like that. And also, most of the time, we're taking parking lots or asphalt and turning that into more environmentally friendly uses, whether it be green roofs or parks and the sort. So even just by putting parking underground, you're helping in that nature. But I wholeheartedly agree that sustainability is an important feature.
I would say that I like seeing what the institutional multifamily developers have been doing or putting into practice in new multifamily buildings. Separately metering all the units, allowing the tenants to actually control how much consumption they use, cuts down substantially on operating costs. It cuts down substantially on operating consumption. Without question, when you're in a gross rent environment in a multifamily building, the best that you can cut down op costs either through new green technologies like solar paneling or any other kind of energy-saving equipment. You can't really cut down on taxes, but you can cut down on your op costs. So your gross, your pocketed money is far more valuable in that kind of scenario. The flip side of that is that there are standards, and certainly the Toronto Green Standard, I think the Tier 3 one, I might be mistaken on that, will and does add substantially to the cost of a building. So as the city wants to see more sustainable development, there will be more cost. What does that cost do? It actually impacts affordability. So there are things that need to play against one another.
I'll just echo what you said, Casey. People tend to look at sustainability on the development side, which is our main focus today, but on the operating side, it's enormously important as well, and there's very simple things you can do to lower your footprint. Yeah. So I'll stick with you. Question for you, Casey, is what is the #1 piece of advice that you give clients who are looking to acquire and develop commercial real estate?
So there's probably a whole combination of advice. We've had the benefit for years of seeing the best of the best developers in this city come out and acquire properties that we list and sell. A firm bid almost always wins it if the pricing is relatively competitive. And so what does that mean? That means that there is a ton of interaction from that developer through our marketing process, through our sales process, where they are asking every single question. They're digging in as much as they possibly can to understand every single nuance to this opportunity. I'm not saying that every site needs to be bid firm, but that does go a very, very long way in terms of actually being successful in acquiring. We're looking for certainty as much as we're looking for pricing now. And we've seen it before where anybody can throw in paper and put stars in sellers' eyes. But really what we want to do is close the deal and move forward with the development. So that'd be the first one. I mean, there's a ton of others, but maybe I'll push it over to the panel for some other thoughts.
Anyone want to react?
How do you feel about firm bids, Michael?
Well, Casey knows very much that I don't do firm bids. But I've done a lot of deals with Casey and his team, and I think the reason why we've been successful in land acquisition with their team is exactly what he was saying, is that the certainty is there. He knows that when my paper comes in, and I say this line to him every time, he could probably recite it, that my paper is based on what they've told me. I'm going to take my due diligence period, I'm going to turn over every rock, and I'm going to see if it's true. If it's true, my price is good. But if there's a surprise that wasn't disclosed to me, then we're going to have a discussion about that. And I put the onus back on the seller. I say, listen, you do all your work. You make sure that for the next I like 45 days, but he tells me I usually have to get 20 to 30. But for the next certain period of time, that we're basically partners, because you're going to tell me everything you know about the property, so I can know about the property. And if that's the case, I'm closing, no problem.
Yeah, I don't want to be long-winded. Let me just dovetail on that. Like, put your consultant teams to work as quickly as possible. Ask a lot of questions. Ask to talk to the vendor. Get in front of them as much as you possibly can. Don't be a nuisance, but definitely show that you are interested. All of that, the questions and everything else that come to us as brokers tends to get translated back to the vendors. And so in this process of selling a piece of real estate, you are doing your best as the person who wants to acquire it to give us the most confidence that this is something that's meaningful and important to you. And that's exactly what Michael does. That's exactly what Daniel does. Yet to do business with you, but it will happen sometime soon. But the best of the best, this is what they do.
Comments on this side?
Look, I just say, I think, again, I'll paraphrase Casey, perhaps put the word, but I think it's ferocious out there. I think right now, I think there's the Canadian brand is incredibly strong. The Toronto brand is incredibly strong. There is a lot of capital that is out there. Everybody wants the same thing. You have to put your very best foot forward, but in order to put your very best foot forward, you have to have insight. And I think that insight, at the end of the day, is what's going to not just win the bid, but it's going to help you actually take it into income and complete the deal and to make money at the end of the day. And I think that's what you want to do, and that's the objective in an acquisition at the end of it all.
Well, I can't speak on the commercial side because we do pure res, but I think there are a lot of similarities. When we're negotiating deals, nobody likes this, but we don't let ourselves be bullied into a short condition period. You have to know what you're getting. You have to know the condition of the land. Whatever latent defects you're going to be encountering in the future, and you don't know about it up front, that's going to cost you from your bottom line. That's going to cost time for you. And as far as low rise is concerned, there's a couple of sites where there's environmental issues that come up after the fact, even after you do your due diligence. So I would say give yourself the appropriate amount of time to do your investigations. If there's another guy who comes along and wants to be crazy, wants to do it in 10 days, 15 days, in our experience, that really isn't worth it. So I would say a minimum for us is like 30 to 45 days. You always ask for 60, but I agree with Michael. Get your team on it right away. Call them before you're even negotiating. Put them on standby, because the second you need them to move on it, they better be ready.
So this is an open question for the panel, and kind of a variation or zoning in particular in one area. What piece of advice would you give to a developer starting out to stand out from the crowd in regards to finding and sourcing financing? Dan?
I mean, again, I'm gonna just carry on the theme about being realistic and not overextending. I would say that. I would suspect that, what I've seen is smaller or first-time developers may get lucky enough to get a site under contract, or even luckily maybe they've got the money to actually to go through with the site and the whole bit, and they're really closely and tightly associated with it. I think they're personally very much attached to it. Really understand what it is they do. Maybe it is beneficial for you to partner up with a developer, or if you, like I said before, take it through the entitlement process and then sell it, because if you are trying to get into the financing realm, I mean, there's a big difference between the SCED A and the SCED B banks, and I think that can have a material effect on what your bottom line is going to be at the end of the day. So I'd say I'd be doing all that math and know exactly what you want when you have that site, and figure it out whether or not it's something that you should be, as a smaller or first-time or developer, carrying through, or if it may be more beneficial for you to partner with somebody who can help put a little bit of gas on the fire and get things done.
I completely agree. And to that, I think for first-time developers, it may be a little bit harder because the barriers to entry for first-time developer are definitely there. But if you can have conversations with multiple people, so you have options when it comes to your financing terms, you don't want to be stuck with a lender that you went to at the last minute because you have a deal. So as much as you can be prepared, and I think the financing panel talked about this and getting yourself in a financing ready position, but talk to people, talk to partners. I mean, there's many ways to skin a cat. You can go to institutional lenders, you can find syndicated money. So plan ahead. Don't be caught with an opportunity. that it's great, but then now you're stuck with these really harsh financing terms that could actually make or break a project. So my advice is, I'm echoing everyone here, just be prepared and canvass your options.
I have a little bit of a different take on, just as the broker, so I don't really need anyone's money in these kinds of transactions, which is a nice position to be in. But we've had the opportunity to see a lot of really, really good, strong success stories about where a developer has managed to create a partnership with an institutional or very, very high net worth capital source that's managed to allow them to take it to the next level, as Tom Kirschman was talking about, and sort of empire build. And what we see out of these developers is that, yes, they have their own culture, but if they don't have any cash, they will start to mold their business so that that culture fits their capital partner's culture, in that they are doing, they are acting the way that their capital acts. They've got strong reporting. They've got a professional office presence. They dress as though they're very serious about business. They do a lot these are typically creative developers that don't want to do this, but they end up moving into that sort of, environment because capital is king. And that's what's really directing these transactions. So I would say that, and I've seen it happen where people approach things too casually, and it's like, yeah, this is a great creative individual, but they can't create a connection with the people with the money, and that's where the deal falls apart.
I agree with what everyone has said so far. I think I think if the only thing I could probably add to that is that be open and transparent. So I think the important thing is, when you're looking at a piece of land, immediately start building that relationship with your lender. Tell them what you're planning to do. Explain to them why you see this land as being a viable option. Explain to them how you think you could create value with it, and just work with them all the way through. And then even after you've acquired it and you're going through the entitlement process, I mean, we still do this to this day with our banks. We give them a timeline a year to 18 months out as to what we think we're bringing to market. What does that mean? That means this is the type of construction financing that we're going to require 18 months out. And so we may not have all our entitlements in place yet, but we think that it's going in that way, and so we're going to need, X amount of dollars for these 3 properties that we're planning to bring to market in 2020, let's say. And so we're just always working that relationship and explaining to them what we're planning to do, because that lender also may have finite capital or finite resources, and they may want to allocate properly. Even the banks, they have single cap limits for developers as to how high they can go for each development company. So it's important to speak to them all, make sure they're all aware of what you're doing, when you might need them, what your timelines are.
So we're going to squeeze in one last question before we open it up to you guys to take us home. And it's to you again, Michael. The question is, what are the top 3 things we should be aware of when developing mixed use in particular?
That's interesting. Okay, so that's, I would say the top 3 things would be design is important, then capital, and then after that operations. And what do I mean by those things? In a mixed-use development, when you're designing it, you need to make sure to really appreciate the needs of every use. An office user needs different loading requirements than a grocery store does, for instance. So you have to be able to make sure there's proper loading in different places that allows those users to both operate properly. Parking requirements are different, so the design has to be in such a way that really each use, even though it's integrated, can function independently as if it was a standalone building. So that's what I'm talking about for design. On the capital front, the way financing works for condos, at least, is based on sales. And you often don't have sales or leases in place for your commercial developments at the same time that you have sales in place for your residential, and you need to get going on your construction. So you have to have proper capital in order to build mixed-use developments. And then the third thing is, once it's built, you're hoping that the design leads to proper operations. You need to make sure that operationally everybody is able to work together, because there's going to be, you share access, you share parking, everything like that. There's going to be cost-sharing agreements in place and so forth. So just need to make sure that the operations work together so that everybody can, again, operate as if there was a standalone building.
So we're getting the hook, and I know people want to keep talking, but I'm pretty sure there's a reception afterwards. So if there's further conversation to be had, maybe we can do it over a drink in a moment.